Shalom, shalom. We're going to start off recapping on some things. First of all, we're going to recap on what happened on Sunday night. We need to visit that and carry on with the message for today. Yom Teruah, what a wonderful, wonderful evening. I'm still reeling from it. And I know everybody else is, and whoever else celebrated the Yom Teruah, you must be as well. We had a wonderful time. We had wonderful things happen. The Spirit of God was moving. Yahweh was moving in the midst of us. We were blowing shofars, and it really impacted the people because the people got into it. They were one with the sound of the shofar and the sound of Abba Yahweh speaking in the midst of us. It was awesome. It was totally awesome. I wanted to go over a few things that happened during that time. It was during that time that we were blowing the shofar. There was, I believe it was towards the end, where when the shofar was blowing, bam, there was a release that was tangible, very tangible, to the point where all I could hear, the shofar stopped. All I could hear was the shofars continuing. And they were continuing, and they were continuing. Even though we weren't physically blowing the shofars, they were still going. Not only that, towards the end, the last shofar blast that we blasted was awesome. I was in the back, and the last blast went out. Soon as it went out and we hit that loud boom, I heard the shouting from behind me, so tangible that I'm looking over behind me and to the side of me, and then I'm looking out, see if I can hear anything outside. It wasn't outside, it was inside. So the shouting, Pastor Donna had shared about the shouting and the using your vocal cords and your mouth to express to Abba Yahweh, and being lined up, being one with the shofar, made a significant difference. Significant. This is probably, if you had to put it on a scale of 1 to 10 of significance of the Yom Teruahs that we've had, this would top it. For me anyways, it topped it. All night long, in the morning, throughout the whole day, I was just like, I was riding white water rafting, in the Spirit. It was awesome. He was just flooding me with all kinds of stuff. I just sat there and soaked it in. And I wasn't right. I was just soaking it in because just one thing right after another. It was awesome. Totally awesome. In the midst of that, I know that people were touched physically because I seen it. Not that I see people, I'm healed. I just knew it. And the impact of what happened that night, we had one individual who just had the fire of Abba just shooting up in his bones. I won't mention his name. He knows who he is. He had the fire just shooting up in his bones. He could not stand still. He had to say something. And he did. And what he said was, I'm just going to paraphrase, everybody knows somebody who's not here tonight, is what he had said. And what it was that was a prophetic word. There was people that should have been here physically as well as spiritually. Even though people were focusing on certain individuals, there were others that were supposed to be here as well. I want to commend the young man for stepping up in the things of Abba Yahweh, because that was very bold. And I expect to see more of that happening, absolutely. Yet, to see the intensity when he said, I have to say something. It just reminded me of that fire being shot up your bones. I can't just sit there and say nothing. I have to say something. And he did. And it was very impactful because it went out there. I wanted to share that for a reason. Because in the midst of all of us shouting, we were doing the same thing, whether you realize it or not. You were confessing things out there that Abba Yahweh was putting in you to go out. that's what happened with the shofars. Because there was a certain point when the shofars hit it, and they were all together. Not to say they weren't all together. There was one point where it hit it, and it stayed there, and that's where it went, escalated up, right to the very end of the service. I seen the children, every one of the children, you could see that the shofars impacted them. You know, great for the leadership team to call on that. I have a sense of that. Call them up front, blow the shofars. Absolutely, that's what that whole night was meant to be. Everybody had something to say, and they were saying it out in the spirit. It was great. I want to keep going, and I really do. Yet the sounding of the shofars was on Yom Teruah, which is considered the first day of the month. Is it correct? Correct me if I'm wrong. Now, which month is that? Number. 8. Is it 8? Yes. Okay. So it's not the 7th month. I'm just getting a feel out there, because I have a sense that, because I couldn't look at it. I was looking it up. If somebody can just find that out, which month that is, right? If it's the 8th, then that brings into, if it's the 7th, that brings it into a whole new, it is the 7th? It is. That's what I had a sense of. I just want to make sure. Because I believe it was in the 7th month you blow the shofars. So that brings a whole different meaning to a whole lot of things for this time in this season. Because that's what was really impacting me during this time. Was I'm going to go over the scriptures that he was talking about during this time frame. Excuse me. Psalm 27 says, when you said, seek my face, my heart said to you, your face, Yahweh, I shall seek. And we did. In Isaiah 55:6, said, seek Yahweh while he may be found, call upon him while he is near. We did. And the last one, and these are the ones that was part of the whole season that came into Yom Teruah. And the last one is the one that really the words really describe what it did to me. Deuteronomy 30, verse 6, moreover, Yahweh Elohim will circumcise your heart, inner man, mind, heart, and the heart of your descendants, to love Yahweh Elohim with all your heart and with all your soul, so that you may live. So that you may live. This time frame, there's a lot of things. I may even go look it up and pull it up. I'm not even for sure who writes it, what the individual's name is, he, she, man, female who's writing it, because they don't write it down. They just use a nickname, which I'm not for sure how to, either way. And it doesn't matter, because it's scriptural. Everything's scriptural and it backs it up, so I like it. And I like some of the things, the one-liners that they come out with. This individual has come out with. It says, we will continue to walk in the footsteps of Messiah in the autumnal appointed times, starting with the day of trumpets and the Messiah. Not one, the day of the trumpets and the Messiah. Now the whole 7th month has been set apart in the first day, which is Yom Teruah, the day of trumpets, or Yom Teruah, as the beginning of the month, so that the whole month is raised to the status of being a Shabbat to Yahweh. Not saying it's Shabbat to Yahweh. He's saying he, she. The individual saying that it's put at that kind of a level. That got my attention, because on the other night, Jordan was talking a lot about sevens. The significance of sevens and numbers in particular. And the reason why I wanted to focus on that one was because 7, we know the 7th day is the Sabbath day, the Shabbat. Shabbat. And that's how we got started coming here, where we are today. Not this day here. Becoming who we are in this congregation is because we were doing a study, and we studied on the Sabbath, the Shabbat. What's the Shabbat? We found out what it is, what day is on, and then we decided as a congregation, say, well, if that's when Shabbat is, we need to make that transition and start doing Shabbat on Shabbat. And we did. Well, the Lord started, Yahweh started doing some things about Shabbat. In the midst of all that, he started showing me things about Shabbat. Because Shabbat is set apart, it's holy, it's supposed to be. And the other thing we're going to get to, it also says, and I'll go through all the scriptures, he says that the Shabbat is a sign between Yahweh and his people. It's a sign. And I didn't realize that. I've heard it all the time. I didn't realize that. It's a sign, just like the festivals, the moons, the stars, they're all signs. So if the stars are a sign, the moon's a sign, Sabbath's a sign, Shabbat's a sign, what's it a sign of? And it says, basically, it's a sign between Yahweh and his people. So which is interesting, because what we just came through was we went, like this, met the king out in the field. And we spent that time with him in his presence. Now we come to the point where the shofar blows, and we're in transition into another month. Now this month here happens to be the 7th month. Now we get into a lot of things. We'll say Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, the head of the year. Yet the interesting part is, when I was reading this, they had said, whoever it is, I'm not for sure at this point, and I liked it because it caught my attention. Because it said, it's Yom Teruah, and it's the beginning of the month, the 7th month. So the first day is Yom Teruah of the 7th month. And it says the whole month is raised to that kind of a status of being a Shabbat, to Yahweh. So when I was looking at that, so I was like, so if that's the way it's perceived, because the individual's obviously a Messianic Jew. He's Jewish, he, she. The individual's Jewish who found Messiah. Which is obvious because reading through the thing, you can tell the testimony of some of the things that the individual puts in, that they were Orthodox Jew. Then they met Messiah. And I want to touch on that right there, because I remember an individual used to go to this synagogue. He came to know Messiah. And some of you may know the individual. And he called himself a Christian. Every time I heard that, that just cringed me. Because I said, you're not. And he says, I am. I accepted. He said, I accepted Jesus as my Savior. I said, no. No. I said, what you did is you became full. You found Messiah. I said, that's different. I said, you're not giving up your identity to choose another identity. And the reason why I want to say this, because in Judaism, that supposedly is the root, the fig tree, not the fig tree, the olive tree. You're supposed to, Paul talks about it. It says, you wild olive branches, you were grafted in. See, now, people will say that the wild olive branch is what they call the Christians. Basically, if you look at it, it's anybody out of the olive tree, which could be anybody. So, yet, plug it in, you're plugged into the root of it all. Now, being plugged into that, what are you doing? You're pushing all that aside. This individual took this and pushed it aside and went to be the wild olive branch. And I told him, I says, no, you can't, you're going backwards. I says, where in the word, where does it say in Torah that you give up all these things once you find Messiah? The festivals were always there on certain days, certain seasons, and they were meant for a reason. Same with this one. So for him to just say, I am not going to take part of the olive tree, I'm going to be the wild, and the wild doesn't produce fruit, barely, and that's why it's wild. It's small, it doesn't take too well. Yet if you have a native olive tree, they last for a long, long, long time. We go to Israel and we see them. They've been there for quite a long time. Yet, do you see any of the wild olive branches out there? Just saying, for those who have ears to hear. And I said that because of the fact of we need to get a hold of these festivals, the Sabbaths, and the seasons that we're in order to be able to see everything we need to be seeing. Because like we were on Sunday, thinking Sunday was Sabbath, and we were a day ahead instead of a day, well, we were actually a day behind because he already came. He was already there on Sabbath. We were supposed to meet him there. Then what happens? We're already late, you know. Can't make that up, yet here we are. We're in a different place now. So now I start going looking through all that. So it's like now the Sabbath. We're starting to go back to these, basics 101 stuff again. So I was like, so I'm going through the Sabbath, and he's really starting to hit hard on a lot of things. And I'm thinking, well, you're setting a day apart, and then he starts showing me things, and it's like some things. It's like, okay, I see that absolutely, and I'll share some of the stuff because some of the things was you see it all the time, and it's like on Shabbat, people, it's like a whitewash fence. People say, yes, I do Shabbat. Yet on Shabbat, here they are doing all these other things, not even thinking about it, and it's violation of Shabbat. Now, understand there were certain things that were done on Sabbath that were violating, that were okay. Now, before you get off and say, "Ooh, I can violate the Shabbat," what did Yeshua say about David when they were in the field picking the grain? He said, "Is it not written that David went into the temple, ate the bread, and his men ate also, which is not lawful for them to do?" When was that? It was on the Shabbat, on Shabbat. It was on Shabbat. So that was okay. Then the other thing is, well, because what did Yeshua always do? He took what was legalistic and pointed it out to everybody. You're being legalistic. This is not what it's meant for. So what is Shabbat meant for? It's a rest. And he always said, enter my rest. There's scripture after scripture about entering his rest. So let's get into some of them here. Let's go, let's read Exodus 31:13. Let's see. Exodus 31:13. Let's start at 12. And it says, the Lord spoke, and in here, when we say Lord, it's Yahweh. Excuse me. And the reason why I want to say Yahweh is because when we say Lord, sometimes it takes it out of the way we should be seeing it, perceiving it. So Yahweh spoke. To me, it has a more of an impact. It says, Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, spoke it with his mouth, saying, as for you, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, you shall surely observe my Sabbaths. For this is a sign between me and you. For how long? Throughout your generations. Why? That you may know that I am. See that one there says, go back, because it says here, I am the Lord who sanctifies you, which is Yahweh again. I am Yahweh who sanctifies you. Therefore you are to observe the Sabbath, for it is holy. Now holy is set apart. It's sacredness. It's a lot of words, consecrated, set apart. Dad. For those who don't know who Dad is, in the faith movement they used to call Kenneth Hagin Dad Hagin. And I was thinking about that because we always talk about Dad, and everybody's like, "Who's Dad?" But Or we'll say, Dad Long. And then it's like, who's Dad Long? It's Pastor Dad Long. That's our spiritual father. He used to always say, about being separated and consecrated. He'd always say that. He said, you have your special dishes for special occasions. And you take them out for these special occasions. And that's what the Sabbath's all about. It's like a special occasion, because it is. Because it is a holy one. So it says, therefore you have observed the Sabbath, for it is holy, set apart. For everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. Now, I read that one there, and I was like, surely be put to death, to die. That's pretty rough. It is. Whether you think it or not, that is rough. Because he said, I put before you life and death, choose life. Yet here he is, he says, if you profane it, he says, whoever profanes it shall be put to death. Now, this is in Exodus. Now, Yeshua always took it to the next level. Now, what would that death represent today? Basically, you're working in the flesh. Anything in the flesh is... So it's not, you've separated yourself from that day. What is that day all about? It's a day of rest. A rest of what? 6 days to work, 7th to rest. Now everybody says, well, I can just sit and go to sleep. And it's a rest. It's a rest from your work. Work. From what you work, what you're doing. If you're a shepherd and you're tending sheep, that's 6 days of that. The 7th day is a Sabbath day. You're resting from that. Yet he also said, who on the Sabbath, who had lost a sheep and fell into a ditch, would not, or was a sheep and an ox, I think he said at one time also, that fell into a ditch, would not go after it on what day? The Sabbath. Now, he said, now who wouldn't? Yeah, he uses that analogy for he leaves the 99 to retrieve the one, which is awesome. You think about that. It's like, I'm the one. I'm the one he set out to get, and he got. So it's like, just the reverential awe of the Sabbath is what we're missing. It really is. And it is. It is. I do not see the reverential awe of Sabbath like it was meant to be. I have not seen that. I mean, we do. This is Sabbath. We don't do this. We stay away from that. We don't do that. We do a lot of physical things. Yet, what's Yeshua? He always brought it to the next level. So then, what's the next level on the Sabbath of all things? The next level is, okay, so I'm not doing work. Are you thinking about it? Being honest. Are you thinking about work on the Sabbath? Guilty. No. You see what I'm saying? It's like, okay, it's a total rest. That means dropping it. And that's not even in your mindset, in your heart, whatsoever. It's separate. It's not like you sit there and then you're like, hear me out, you'll get a thought, you have to take it captive. It's what you do with the thought. If you sit there, oh, I have to do that. Oh, yes. Write it down so I don't forget it, and then write it down, stick it in my pocket. Nobody's going to see it, Or, on the Sabbath, go like this, type it in your note things. Nobody's watching. You know what I'm saying? Just saying. It's one of those things that's like, I'm not here to say you're doing things wrong. Yet I am, because I'm part of it. Because what I've been shown, I was like, I see things differently now. After Yom Teruah, it's like, it's wonderful. And it's like, what he's talking about the Sabbath, and I'm going to share, I got to share this with you, because he told me this. This is why I want to share it with you. He said, Sabbath. You need to understand the Sabbath in order to understand everything else in the festivals. So I was like, okay. So I wrote that down because I thought it was a pretty nifty little saying. Yeah? So that's when it all started, because I was like, okay, the Sabbath. So I said, what's that got to do with the festivals? Has everything to do with the festival. Has everything to do with everything. Because it's the foundation of everything. In the beginning, what happened? Light be, this was created, that's created, this was created. What was created on the sixth day? What's the number of man? 6. So he had to rest because he created us. That's the way I look at it. It's a big creation. It was big work. And in saying that, what I did, and when I started digging into it, what I noticed was every day he created the day and everything in that day. First he created the day and everything part of that day. He got to the sixth day, the same thing with man. Same thing. The seventh day, what did he do? He created the day. Then he separated it. So when I seen, because he was saying, even the priests, when they perform their duties, violate the Sabbath. And I was like, how can they be violating the Sabbath by doing their duties? Now I understand. He created the Sabbath, yet he made the day and then created the Sabbath. Yet what does he say? I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. It's like, it's like, so he's Yahweh of the Sabbath. And in the letters that we read, he says the same thing. In the Gospels, I should say, he says the same thing. I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. And that's when, even when he has talked about when they were out there picking the grain, that's what he says. He says, do you not know that David and his men went into the temple, ate the bread, which is forbidden for them to do, and they did it on the Sabbath. So it's like, so they were in violation of life. Yet it wasn't wrong. So he says that to them. And matter of fact, let me see if I can find that one right here. Because that one is really, because you got to think about these things that he says. It's very, Matthew 12. Matthew 12. So we're not talking about giving you a right to violate the Shabbat with things you know you're not supposed to be violating with. Yet there's things in Shabbat that you're supposed to be doing. And that's what we need to focus on. You know. So Matthew 12, verse 1. And then it says, at that time, Yeshua went through the grain fields on this Shabbat with his disciples, because they were hungry, and began to pick the heads of the grain to eat. Now when the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples do what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. So they're pointing out a violation of Sabbath. You know, all people to be pointing, right? And he said to them, have you not read what David did when he became hungry, he and his companions, how he entered the house of Yahweh, and they ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, yet it's for the priest alone. Or have you not read the law on the Sabbath? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priest in the temple break the Shabbat and are innocent? See, they break the Shabbat, yet they're innocent. To me, I'm like, how can you break something and be innocent? Yet, what they were doing was what they were supposed to be doing on Shabbat. Anybody else, like he says, it's forbidden to do. So they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And it says, yet are innocent. Yet I say to you that someone greater than the temple is here. If you had known what this means, I desire, because you remember the movie Chosen, where he says, he got that, just like shoot it right out there. He says, I desire compassion, because he said it a little bit different, and not sacrifice. You would have not condemned the innocent. So everybody's innocent. Yet he's saying you guys have condemned the innocent. And then he goes right into verse 8. He says, for the Son of Man is the Lord of the Sabbath. You know, since this is Greek, they use a different word. Yet when you go into the word Lord of in the Old Testament, it differs from what they use in the Greek. You know, from here they use authority, Lord, Master, and rightfully you could say yes, Yahweh is the authority. You know, absolutely, He's definitely Lord. He's definitely Master. It's Yahweh just settles it. That's His name. So you look at that. It says, for the Son of Man is Yahweh of the Sabbath. So He's the Lord of it. He's the master of it. You know, departing there, He went into their synagogue, and of course, this is the thing. Then He goes in there into the synagogue. When He goes into the synagogue, what day is that usually? 99.9% of the time it was on Shabbat. And He always corrected them on Shabbat. He says, yes, you know, you've done this and this and this. It says, yet you should have done this. So here's these people that are in the synagogue. And He goes in there. And here we say it right here. He says, and a man was there whose hand was withered. And they questioned Yeshua, asking, is it lawful? Because they're testing Him. They want to catch Him in His words. And He says, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So that they might accuse Him. And Him knowing that, He goes, and He said to them, what man is there among you who has a sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will he not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable then is a man than a sheep? So then it is lawful to do good on the Shabbat, on the Sabbath. Then He said to the man, you know, He always addressed them, and then He talks to the individual. And He said to the man, He says, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored. You know, your faith, because He said, you did, it happened. And so once he did that, his hand became normal. And all the Pharisees, you know, they conspired to come against Him because of what He has done. Because what is He doing? He's busting up their gig. That's what He's doing. Yet what He's doing is He's showing everybody what is lawful to do on Shabbat. Obviously what they were doing on Shabbat was not lawful, because they did not allow that. The man that was healed by the pool, what's the first thing the Pharisees said? Yo, yo, it's Shabbat, what are you doing? I'm picking up my mat. That's a violation of Shabbat. He says, I don't care. I don't need it anymore. I can walk. The man said, pick it up. He says, who? I don't know. He says he doesn't know. He didn't know who He was. All he knew is He said walk, and he took what he did, take up the mat and walked. Violation of Shabbat to them, not to Yeshua. Everywhere we went. I like that, because He always stirred it up, you know. It was like stir up the waters on Shabbat. Everywhere He went, He would always heal and do something on the Shabbat to show what Shabbat was all about. It's entering a rest, because He's talking about entering a rest. Now, Shabbat is entering a rest. What rest are we entering? We're entering His rest. You know, He made Shabbat for the man. He made it for us. Yet He created it, so He knew what we needed. So I was like, so to violate it, and that's the interesting thing, that you would go and violate it. Why would you violate the Shabbat, the Sabbath? Why would you? Well, I wouldn't violate the Shabbat. Yet, now analyze yourself. Look into your heart, because these are the times to do it. We still got time. Because what He's showing us is, because what we're doing is we're robbing ourselves of what Shabbat is really about. Because Shabbat is really about mishpacha, family. Because what was He doing? Who were these people that He was healing? What did He say to the woman that came up and said, you know, was looking for a little crumb from under the table there for healing? And what did He say? It's not for the dogs, you know. She was not in the family at the time. So she was considered a dog. Yet he was there doing what was needed for the family. Olive tree, she was the wild olive branch. Yet the time had not come. So yet, here we go again. Yet because she persisted and her faith was great, what happened? She received. She received. And what he said, how great is your faith? He says, because she said, even the dogs eat the crumbs under the master's table. That's pretty bold. When you're talking to the Messiah, you're telling him that even the dogs, you call me a dog, all right, I'm a dog. I'll even eat the crumbs. Whatever whatever there, I'll take. And your faith made you whole. Boom, done. So Shabbat, Sabbath, set apart. It's a holy thing. It was for us. It was for family. And I think the biggest part of Shabbat that was missing in, that I can see, and I could be wrong, yet I like to observe things, is family. Because what's the biggest thing, when we used to have a lot of people come in, and what was the first thing they said? Exactly, it's like family. You guys treat each other like family. That is the thing that catches people. That's what draws them in. That's what Abba Yahweh has been trying to do for thousands and thousands of years with just the Shabbat. To get the family back together. Because if you look at it now, you look at society now, and it's total opposite where it should be. Why is that? Because the remnant, I'm going to go there, because they talked about there's a remnant that's behind. When they shared that on on Yom Teruah, first thing I thought of, what do they call those rugs that's left over from the big piece? They call them remnants. And what do they use them for? Wipe your feet, because you usually put them in the doors. Wiping your feet or collecting all the stuff, and that's what it's meant for. If you're a remnant, that's usually what happens to you. From the outside going in. Inside that doesn't happen, because it's a totally different picture from the inside. And we don't focus on the outside. Yet it was interesting with that remnant, because it's only a remnant that's going to be the one that sticks out. Because if you take the piece of that rug and you put the other rug out there after everything's been used for years, what's the one that's going to stick out the most? The remnant. Because they can see it's been used. It's been used properly. It's made what it was made for. So Shabbat was made for one thing and one thing only. Set apart from everything else to give you rest. Not just a rest, his rest. So if we enter in his rest, then we enter into, after Shabbat, we get into the regular work week again. And then Shabbat again. Now it's a cycle. It's always the ascendancy up. Then you have, like they were talking about, the monthly ones. So your monthly ones, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th month, which is like this, is considered a Shabbat. Then you have the 7 years, and that's the Shemitah year. Now that's considered a rest. And then, was it 7 times 7? Was that the 49? That's considered a rest, because what is that? That's returning to, because even when you become a slave, you have to go back. You have to go back. They set up certain ways that you can stay if you want, yet it was made for you to go back to where you're supposed to go. That's what Shabbat's about, going back to where you're supposed to go. Going into that place of Shabbat is an eye-opening experience, because it's no way you're going to see things like the work week. Because what did he do? Man does work every week. Because the thing I've seen too is all these things were created, and then man was created. And then man was put in the garden. To do what? To work the garden. So he was meant to work the garden for 6 days. Seventh day he was meant to rest, just like Abba Yahweh did. So here we are working it. Yet then you look here. Here comes Yeshua, and then he's working. Appears so on the Sabbath, healing people, setting people free. Yet what did he say? That's his Father's works. That's what he's doing, and that's what it was meant to be done on that day. It's a rest from doing your own thing. It's what he wanted to do. Yet notice what his focus was at that time frame, because we're talking about Shabbat and it's about family. It was about, what was his whole focus? It's about Israel. When you come down to it, it's all about Israel. You look in the scriptures, it says his eyes are always focused on one thing continually, and that's Israel. That's the olive tree. Then it says in the scriptures, it's also considered, watch the fig tree. So, yet the olive tree is everything that was meant to be, and we're supposed to be grafted into that. So that's the family. Here we go. We're part of the family. Yet it gives Shabbat a whole different meaning, a way to look at it. Because if you're sitting there thinking that, no, about 5 o'clock, Shabbat's over, I'm out of here. Honestly, it's like, or we looking at it, it's like, because most of the time, it's like, Shabbat's all about family. Everybody's doing something, everybody's talking with something and enjoying one another and being family. And then after it's over, everybody goes home, and it's like, I really missed that. I wonder if we could extend it for a little bit. Dad used to talk about extending, always push the borders of Shabbat in the beginning and in the end. Open it up a little longer because of what Shabbat stands for. He understood Shabbat. I tell you, he understood Shabbat. Yeah. So, knowing that Israel is his focus, and that it's the apple of his eyes, the pupil of his eyes, because the scripture says so, so that's the center of his attention. So what should our attention be? Exactly. That's why we as a congregation are very blessed, because we do watch Israel, and we do what Abba Yahweh tells us to do for Israel. We are very much part of Israel. So I want to go to, let's see here. Go to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus 20, verse 5. We'll start at, now these are when he's talking about the Ten Commandments. And then you go down to verse 8, he goes right into, remember the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Yet the seventh day is a Sabbath day of the Lord, which is Yahweh your Elohim. In it you shall not do any work, you or your sons or your daughters, your male, your female, your servant or your cattle, or your sojourners who stays with you. For 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, and the sea and all that is in it. And then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, Yahweh blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. See, he blessed it and he made it holy. The only way that can change is if we do something with it. Yet it doesn't affect, it's affecting you personally. Yet, on the other hand, if you're in a sanctuary, that's not a good thing. Yet it should be a reverential awe of, like when he said, "You put to death." I mean, if you're going to walk around like, no, you have to be sensitive to the Spirit of God to say, all right, we need to work on this, and we're going to take care of this and get rid of it. No more thinking about work during Sabbath. All right, no more taking notes about work on Sabbath. Okay. I'm not doing that. I'm just using illustration on. Everybody was saying he takes notes about work on Sabbath. No. Thought about it. Thought about work. Honestly, with that, I did not write it down. It was just one of those thoughts you take it captive, and that's what I did. A lot of things were happening at work, and I was just sitting there, we're doing something, and it comes up, and I'm like, oh, no, I can't do that. Be done with that. Out. That's not part of this day. Be gone. So it can't be, because it'll take you right out of there, and you don't want to go there, because you want to keep there holy. You don't want to corrupt it. So in the midst of all of that, he's the Lord of the Sabbath, Yahweh of Sabbath. And when we're walking into the Sabbath, it's not just walking here into the Sabbath. The Sabbath starts the evening before. And during all of this, I got all these questions to ask. So when does Sabbath start? And then you look in there, it says sundown to sundown. Right? So then you ask yourself, where is he talking about that? Israel. Because if you're in Alaska, you have 6 months. That's total either light or darkness. Well, imagine that, 6 months of a Sabbath. Woo! You understand? It's just like you have to have a border somewhere because you're outside. Because when he's talking about Israel. That's why we need to keep our eyes on Israel so we know what's going on and what's happening. So when he says the Sabbath, he's talking about when he's in Israel. Because he's not talking about anywhere else, because he's not anywhere else. So yet, you think about that, and because they have the rabbis have 2 days because you need a witness. So they talked about it, and then it takes that time to travel to go out there and tell them. If the started there, that's when it started. They heard about it a day later. Yet it started right there. It just took time to travel. Yet today, what technology is, automatically. Matter of fact, you don't even have to wait. You have all the charts that tell you exactly when it is, to the minute, to the very second. If you really want to be technical about it. Yet the Sabbath it's a heart thing. Because you don't want to be a legalistic Sabbath observer. You want to be heart-convicted Sabbath worshiper. You want to honor the Sabbath from your heart, not your head, because you miss it. You understand? You miss it. And we don't want to miss what he's got for us on Sabbath. Prime example is what happened on Yom Teruah. That was a Sabbath. It's not the seventh day. It's a Sabbath day. Yet understand, seventh is a Sabbath, yet there's also a Sabbath day. A lot of the feasts, because he says, understand the Sabbath, because I'll say it again because it says Sabbath, you need to understand the Sabbath in order to understand everything else in the festivals. Now, in the festivals, they have Sabbath days as well as a Sabbath day, a seventh day. So, are they the same? They're treated the same because the observance is the same, except one's on a seventh day and then one's a Sabbath day. It's still set apart. Yet even the festivals, he says, those are you going to do forever. Just keep doing them. One of the things doing my reading, they said that this guy, I was talking with this individual, and he says the only thing they're going to do in the millennium is they're going to do tabernacles. And I'm like, the only thing? I said, where do you see that? Well, in the scripture it says that they will be coming in on the Sabbath. Not on the Sabbath, on the Sukkah, during that time, the tabernacles, and celebrate that festival. Yet it didn't say they weren't going to do any other festivals. It just mentioned that festivals. So you can't say yes or no. Right? I'm not. I'm not going to say, well, no, it's just that and nothing else, because I don't have nothing to back it up. You know what I'm saying? Either way, you don't have anything to back it up. Yet he does say in his word, they will be forever. Yet why would it be just tabernacles? They mention tabernacles there. It will be. So we definitely know that tabernacles will be part of that period of time. That's the interesting. We need to look at that and start digging into it, because people will say that's the only thing. Well, that's not what it said. It says they will be doing that on that time frame. So it's the same thing with the Sabbath. We need to understand what the Sabbath is so we can honor the Sabbath and partake of the Sabbath. And it's like for some people, it's like Sabbath is just another day, and they just call it the Sabbath day, and they still do whatever they want. Lord, open their eyes and give them understanding. That's my prayer, because you miss out on it, because there's so much richness in that day that we need to tap into. There really is. So I just had that very heavy sense of getting an understanding of really what Shabbat is, the seventh day and Shabbat, the Sabbath, what it really is, so that we need to walk in it, so we can be partakers of what he's doing, and then not be legalistic about the things of Shabbat, because the scriptures all show, healing is definitely not a violation of Shabbat, even though they said it was. It's not. If it was, he wouldn't be out there doing it like he was. He would have addressed it. There's things you can do on Shabbat, and there's things you cannot do on Shabbat. So let's do the things we can do on Shabbat, and let's press on with that. Gotcha? Shabbat, 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 Shalom, Shalom, Shalom. Got to remember, Shabbat. There's a piece in Shabbat that you need to get a hold of. So, Shabbat on the seventh day and Sabbath on the Sabbath day. Till next time, Shalom.